We arrived at Oswald's a little later than the others, literally half an hour late. Lily, as always, looked impeccable. Her light dress, clinging to her figure, attracted the attention of everyone around her. I knew that many men could not help but glance in her direction, and today was no exception. She seemed to feel like the center of attention, smiling at everyone who crossed her path. It could not help but catch the eye. Oswald greeted us with a wide smile. His energetic nature always attracted people. Tall, self-confident, he knew how to create a festive atmosphere around himself. The evening promised to be ordinary. Glasses of champagne, light conversations. But from the very first minutes, I began to feel something elusive in the air. Something not as usual. "I'm glad you came," Oswald said, lightly touching Lily's shoulder. The gesture was casual, but it seemed to me that there was some unnecessary closeness in it. Lily laughed, her laughter echoing throughout the room, attracting the attention of all the guests. I felt a slight uneasiness begin to grow inside me. Soon the guests began to sit down on the sofas and armchairs in the living room, immersed in animated conversations. Oswald, as usual, took on the role of the host of the evening. Like a conductor, he discreetly controlled everything that was happening around, maintaining a mood in which everyone felt comfortable, but this time his attention to Lily seemed too obvious. He glanced at her more often than usual, and each time their eyes met, I felt a strange tension. The conversations began to die down, and Oswald suggested a game. "A simple game, nothing complicated," he said, smiling, and this proposal was met with general approval. Everyone was used to his unexpected ideas, and no one wanted to disturb the atmosphere of the party. I tried to smile too, but inside I was uneasy. Intuition told me that this game would not be ordinary. At first the game seemed innocent. Simple questions, easy tasks, laughter. However, after a while, the tone began to change. With each new question, Oswald added an element that made the situation more personal, more risky. I noticed how his gaze stopped more and more on Lily, and her behavior began to change too. Her smile became bolder, her movements freer. This was unusual for her, and it began to worry me. "Lily, why don't you sit on my lap?" Oswald suddenly suggested, and his voice sounded so casual that it almost did not seem strange. But I immediately tensed. The room froze. All eyes were directed at her, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Lily's gaze lingered on my face, as if waiting for a reaction from me, but I did not have time to say anything. She just smiled slightly and, as if nothing had happened, stepped forward, sat on Oswald's lap, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The seconds dragged on for an eternity. I noticed how his arm went around her waist, and she, leaning slightly, was too close to him. The laughter of the guests brought everyone back to reality, but for me it was the first alarm bell. I was silent, watching them, trying to convince myself that this was just an innocent game. However, with each passing minute, her behavior became more and more daring. The evening went on, and the game became more and more provocative. With each new task, I felt the tension more and more acutely. Lily, usually reserved, began to behave in a way I had never seen her. Her laughter became louder, her movements became more confident, and soon she began to play this game with a passion that I did not understand. I watched her every move, trying to find a moment to intervene, but each time something stopped me. It was as if I was bound by invisible bonds that did not allow me to act. Oswald, like a skillful manipulator, continued to control the evening program. His every step was thought out, and it was as if he was deliberately pulling Lily further and further beyond the line of what was allowed. "Lily, why don't you kiss John?" Oswald said, with a slight smile on his face. The whole room froze again. All eyes turned to my wife. I noticed how her eyes sought my gaze, but I could not react. Her face became slightly paler, but she still took a step forward. Slowly, as if struggling with herself, she approached John. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a smirk on his face. I saw how her breathing became faster, how her hands trembled slightly, but she did not stop. Their lips met, and this kiss was long, too long. It was not just a friendly touch of lips, It was an act filled with challenge and passion. When she pulled away, her face was tense, but there was a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. The room exploded with applause, laughter, but I couldn't share their joy. Oswald looked pleased, as if he had achieved his goal. I saw his gaze linger on Lily, and when she returned to her seat, she was no longer the woman I had come to this party with. The game continued, but the tension became unbearable. Everything that was happening began to spiral out of control. At that moment, I realized that the night was just beginning and that there was more to come than just a game. When Lily returned to her seat, I noticed that she was no longer looking at me. Her gaze was focused on Oswald, who continued to lead the evening with an easy confidence. There was a tension in the air that was hard to ignore, but no one else in the party seemed to sense it except me. I wanted to say something to stop this madness, but the words caught in my throat. Lily and I had been married for many years, and in all that time I had never seen her like this. Her behavior was alien, almost unfamiliar. Oswald, as if sensing my state, cast a fleeting glance at me, in which I caught something more than simple satisfaction. He was enjoying this, as if everything was part of his carefully thought-out plan. Lily, I called softly, but she did not hear, or did not want to hear. Her eyes glittered in the dim room, and in this glitter there was a spark that I could not understand. "Let's continue," Oswald declared, lightly snapping his fingers, and his words echoed around the room. This time the task is more difficult. I was already expecting something overtly provocative, and my body tensed, as if preparing for a blow. However, Oswald, like a master of the theater, decided to slightly reduce the tension first. He offered some easier tasks to the other guests without touching Lily, and for a moment it gave me a chance to relax a little. But everything changed when he turned his attention back to my wife. His voice became softer, almost gentle, but I felt that there was something dangerous hidden behind this softness. "Lily," he began, "it's your turn again. Why don't you show us a little dance?" It sounded almost innocent, but I knew there was more to it. Lily froze in place, her face slightly pale, but then she slowly stood up. A tense silence hung in the room. No one moved. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Oswald stood up and turned on the music, soft rhythms filling the space. Lily took the first step. Her movements were timid at first, but with each passing second, she became more confident. I sat in a daze, watching my wife dance in front of everyone, but especially in front of Oswald. His gaze never left her. He followed her every move, and I felt something breaking inside me. The music faded out, but Lily didn't stop. Her movements became more sensual, provocative. At some point, I saw Oswald, as if in response to her dance, take a step forward, but still stop. "Bravo!" Someone's voice rang out, and the room exploded with applause. I felt cold sweat running down my back. Oswald came up to Lily, took her hand, and looking straight into her eyes, whispered something that I couldn't hear. She only nodded, her smile never leaving her face. "That was amazing," he said out loud, letting go of her hand. "But now it's time for the last task for this evening." I tensed, knowing what was coming next. Everything inside me screamed to stop it, but again I couldn't move. Lily returned to her place next to me, her face calm, but there was something new in her eyes, something that scared me to my core. Oswald walked to the center of the room, his footsteps like heartbeats. He smiled at everyone, but his attention was focused on us. "The last task is going to be a little personal," he said, tilting his head slightly toward Lily. "Lily, I think you know what to do." A tense silence fell over the room, and I felt that icy coldness settling over my body again. Lily looked at me, but I couldn't read her expression. She took a step forward toward Oswald, but in that moment something inside me finally broke. I stood up. The whole thing had suddenly become unbearable. I had been silent and patient for too long, but now I had to act. Oswald looked at me in surprise, but I didn't notice. I took a step forward, as if an invisible force was leading me to Lily. "This is the end," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but a storm was raging inside me. She turned to me, her eyes glittering, but she didn't move. Oswald took a step back, but his smug smile didn't disappear. At that moment, something changed. Lily stopped, frozen in mid-stride. I felt her gaze burning through me. Oswald seemed surprised by my intervention, but he still held his ground. The room was plunged into tense anticipation. All eyes were fixed on us. The guests, who had recently been laughing and chatting, fell silent, as if anticipating the denouement of this strange game. "What are you doing?" Lily asked, her voice quiet but tense. Her eyes darted between Oswald and me, as if she didn't know what to do. "I can't take this anymore," I said, and I didn't recognize my own voice. It was muffled, as if the sound was coming from far away. I took another step forward, approaching Oswald and Lily. "Maybe you should sit down, friend," Oswald suggested calmly, but with a slight mockery in his voice, crossing his arms over his chest. His posture gave away the complete confidence that he was in control of the situation, but I saw a moment of confusion in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to intervene. "No, I won't sit and watch you try to ruin our lives," I replied, looking straight at him. Oswald shook his head slightly, the smile on his face growing wider, but now it looked more like a mask. "Oh, come on," he said, his tone softening, but there was a hidden disdain in it. "It's just a game, nothing more." But it was more than a game, and I knew it. None of this was a coincidence. Oswald was cleverly manipulating everyone around him, and Lily seemed to have fallen into his net. I watched her slowly lose control, her behavior becoming more and more risky, and it scared me. "Lily, let's go," I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice was still shaking with anger and disappointment. She looked at me with incomprehension, as if everything that was happening only partially concerned her. I saw something strange slip into her eyes, as if she was already in another world, far from our reality. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice sounding as if through clenched teeth. "It's all right. It's just an evening, just a game." "This isn't a game," I said, trying to hold her gaze. "He's using you, using us. Can't you see that?" She looked away, her lips trembling. Oswald watched our scene with the air of a predator who has already caught his prey and is enjoying the moment before the final blow. He stepped closer to Lily, his hand touching her shoulder again, as it had when they met, but now this touch seemed almost imperious. "Lily, you're a grown woman. You can decide for yourself what you want to do," he said, his voice full of false sympathy, but I sensed a hidden threat in it. He knew that in this moment all his power over us lay. My hand clenched into a fist. I couldn't stand and watch this any longer. At that moment, I was filled with rage, and I took a step toward them. Oswald looked at me mockingly. "And here comes our hero," he said quietly, but so that everyone could hear. The room was tense. No one spoke. The guests froze, like spectators in an arena, waiting to see what would happen next. I took a step forward, ready to punch him, but Lily suddenly stepped between us. "Stop," she shouted, her voice breaking. "Stop it, it's not what you think." I stopped, looking at her. Her face was tense, but there was still this strange fire in her eyes that I couldn't understand. "What do you mean?" I asked, barely containing my anger. Lily shook her head, as if trying to find words that wouldn't come to her mind. "None of this matters," she finally whispered, her voice full of despair. "Not matters?" I couldn't believe my ears. "This is destroying us, Lily. Do you understand that?" She fell silent again, and in that moment I realized that things had gone too far. Oswald wasn't just playing with us. He was manipulating us, destroying everything I thought was important. I felt the adrenaline fill my veins, forcing me to act. But before I could do anything else, the door to the room swung open. A tall figure stood on the threshold. It was Max, an old friend of Oswald's, with whom I knew he had not only a friendship but also some strange, obscure business. Max looked around the room, his gaze falling on me. "It looks like the evening is getting more interesting," he said with a slight grin. This unexpected interruption broke the tense atmosphere for a moment, but I knew that the real drama was only just beginning. Max stepped forward, his footsteps sounding like blows in the silence. He glanced at Oswald, then turned his gaze to me. "You're at the right time, Max," Oswald said, his voice shaking slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "We're just having fun?" "Yes," I see, Max replied, his eyes lighting up with a strange fire as he glanced at Lily. It looks like the evening is taking on a new meaning. I felt my heart beat faster. Something about Max's expression made me feel threatened. This evening was really changing, and something told me that things were about to take an even more unexpected turn. Max slowly approached Lily, his gaze focused only on her, as if Oswald and I had simply disappeared. I didn't know what to do. Every second dragged on like an hour, but one thought flashed through my mind. I needed to get her out of here. Oswald looked at Max, but didn't stop him. On the contrary, I saw a slight approval in his eyes. Max stopped next to Lily and spoke quietly, but so that I could hear. Lily, why don't we continue in a more intimate setting? I couldn't stand aside any longer. I rushed forward, grabbing Lily's hand and pulling her toward the exit. Max tried to stop me, but I could no longer control myself. We're leaving, I barked, and that was the last thing I said before Lily and I left the room. But even as we walked to the car, I knew that this night was just beginning. When we left the house, the night air was cold and damp. It slapped us in the faces, but did nothing to get rid of the strange heaviness that had accumulated over the evening. Lily was silent. She hadn't resisted when I grabbed her hand and led her out of the house, but now her steps were slow, as if she were in a trance. Do you even understand what happened? I couldn't stay silent any longer. My voice was full of anger and disappointment. Lily didn't answer. She didn't even look at me. We reached the car, and I opened the door with such force that I almost broke the lock. Get in, I said through clenched teeth. She slowly sat down in the front seat, but her eyes were empty, as if everything that had happened didn't matter to her. I slammed the door and walked around the car, trying to cope with the wave of emotions that had washed over me. My heart was pounding in my chest like crazy, and I felt like if I didn't spill all the words that had accumulated inside me now, I would just explode. As I sat behind the wheel and started the engine, Lily finally spoke. It's not what you think. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made me freeze for a moment. I looked at her. Her eyes, which had been full of that strange shine all evening, now seemed tired, almost empty. Then explain, I answered, holding back my rage. Explain, what was that? Was it just a game? You call it not that. She fell silent, turning away to the window again. The neighbors' yards flew past the glass, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. I searched for an answer, although I already understood that I was unlikely to hear what I wanted. I didn't know it would go this far. She finally whispered, her voice trembling. So far, I couldn't help but smile bitterly. Kisses? Lap dances from Oswald? In your opinion, that's not far? Lily's hands clenched nervously, her fingers trembling. She tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I could see her confusion, her fear, but it only added fuel to the fire. I wanted her to explain everything. And now, why did you even do this? Why didn't you stop? My voice was getting louder and louder, and I didn't even realize how deep my anger went. She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw a genuine despair in her eyes. I couldn't, she answered, and her voice broke. Max, Oswald. I couldn't stop. I couldn't believe my ears. Are you saying they made you? Lily shook her head nervously, her face contorted with pain. It wasn't what you think, she repeated, her hands shaking so badly that she pressed them to her knees, as if trying to stop them. I tried to leave. I didn't know it would be like this. What didn't you know? I couldn't hold back any longer. You didn't know it would ruin everything? Or did you just not want to realize it? Lily turned away again, her breathing quickening. For a moment, I thought she was ready to burst into tears, but the tears never came. I stopped the car at the side of the road, abruptly turning off the engine. Silence covered us like a heavy blanket. Are you trying to avoid answering this? I asked, turning to her. Do you think this will all end on its own? Lily slowly turned her head, her face pale, her eyes filled with fear. I can't explain it to you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They left me no choice. Who? I felt my anger rising again. Max? Oswald? They manipulated you? And you just went along with it. She looked at me, her lips trembling, but she didn't say a word. I tried to resist. She finally said, her voice full of pain. But Oswald, Max, they knew what they were doing. This wasn't just a game. Her words hit me like a blow. I felt cold sweat break out on my forehead. What were they doing? I asked, my heart pounding. What are you hiding from me? Lily lowered her head, her hands nervously clutching the hem of her dress. It all started earlier than you think. She began quietly, her voice full of fear. Oswald, he was always trying to control the people around him. But this time, he went further. Max, they threatened me. Threatened? I couldn't believe my ears. With what? She sighed, her face twisted with emotion she couldn't contain anymore. That if I didn't do what they wanted, they would ruin our lives. Lily finally looked up at me, her eyes full of tears. I thought I could control the situation, but I was wrong. I froze. My mind still couldn't wrap itself around how my wife could have gotten herself into something like this. Threats? Manipulation? I remembered the way Oswald had looked at her all evening, how he had pushed her to do this, and suddenly the whole picture began to come together. You should have told me sooner, I said, feeling a mixture of anger and pity building inside me. We could have gotten through this together. I was scared, Lily said quietly, her voice shaking. I was afraid they would do something terrible. And then I thought that if I just played along, if I did this for the sake of keeping the peace, they would leave me alone. I fell silent, processing her words. She had been cornered this whole time, and I hadn't seen it. But now that it was all out in the open, there was only one thought. Oswald and Max wouldn't stop. We have to do something, I said firmly, starting the car. We can't just leave this like this. Lily nodded, her eyes growing more confident. We were in this together now. And that was the only thing that gave us hope. We sat in the car, immersed in a viscous silence. Everything Lily had just told me was settling in my head, slowly falling into place. I couldn't believe that Oswald and Max had gone so far. They had manipulated not only my wife, but the entire situation, trying to ruin our lives. We can't leave it like this, I said firmly, turning to Lily. They have to answer for everything they've done. She was silent, her head down, her face tired, exhausted. I could tell she didn't want any more conflict, but this wasn't something that could be left without consequences. Oswald and Max shouldn't think they could play with people's lives with impunity. What are you going to do? She asked quietly, without looking up. First, we have to get out of here. I started the engine and smoothly pulled away, taking us away from this house where everything had gone wrong. I'll deal with them, but we have to be careful. Lily sighed, lowering her head again. I didn't know what was going through her head, but she wasn't the same woman I knew. Fear and despair had changed her, and I knew she wasn't ready to fight. We drove in complete silence, broken only by the sound of tires on the asphalt. My mind was completely immersed in thoughts of how we could deal with Oswald and Max. But every plan that came into my head seemed weak and ill-conceived. We didn't know what they were willing to do. These people were dangerous, and we were already drawn into their game. As we pulled up to our house, I noticed that Lily was starting to shake. Her hands, white as chalk, were tightly gripping the seatbelt. I turned off the car and turned to her. Lily, you have to trust me, I said, trying to speak as gently as possible. We can handle this. I won't let them destroy us. She looked at me, and there was gratitude in her eyes, mixed with deep fear. She was still afraid of Oswald and Max, of their influence. I realized that this fear would not be eliminated in one evening. We entered the house, and silence surrounded us, as if protecting us from the outside world. I locked the door, as if I could keep out the threats from outside. I'm going to take a shower, Lily said, her voice barely audible. I nodded, understanding that she needed time to recover. I could not blame her for this. I remained in the living room, sitting on the couch trying to collect my thoughts. Pieces of a plan flashed through my mind, but I could not concentrate. Oswald was dangerous, but Max seemed more unpredictable. I knew that they would not back down so easily. Perhaps they had already realized that Lily and I were no longer going to play by their rules. My thoughts were interrupted when I heard a knock on the door. A sharp, insistent knock that made my heart stop for a moment. I got up from the couch, trying to remain calm, and went to the door. Who's there? I asked, trying to sound confident. "It's me, Oswald," came the voice from the other side, calm, confident, as if nothing had happened. "We need to talk." I gripped the door handle, several options flashing through my mind. Open it and attack right away, or not open it at all. But no matter what I chose, one thing was clear. This would not end with a peaceful conversation. "Get out of here, Oswald," I said firmly, trying not to give him a reason to think that I was scared. "Are you sure you want to end this evening like this?" His voice was full of hidden threat. "We haven't even started, you know that?" I felt anger flare up inside me, but I suppressed it immediately. Oswald was trying to provoke me, as always. He was playing, hoping that I would make the first move. "You've already lost," I said, moving away from the door. "You can't manipulate us any further." There was a short pause, and I heard Oswald say something quietly to someone on the other side of the door. Maybe it was Max. Maybe they weren't alone. "Okay." Oswald's voice came colder now. "You've made your choice. But remember, choices have consequences." I stood by the door, motionless, until I heard footsteps retreating. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I felt that this wasn't the end. It was only a warning. When I returned to the living room, Lily had already come out of the shower. She stood in the doorway, her hair wet, her face pale. "Who was that?" she asked quietly. "Oswald," I answered, looking at her. "But he's gone?" "Gone?" Her voice was full of disbelief. "For now, yes," I sighed, feeling the full weight of the situation. "But this is not the end." Lily came to me and hugged me. Her body was cold, trembling. I hugged her back, trying to convince myself that we could do this, that we could find a way out. But even standing in Lily's arms, I knew one thing. Oswald and Max were not going to retreat. They were like predators who did not let go of their prey. And our fight with them was just beginning. And that's where today's story ends. If you liked it, don't forget to like it and leave a comment. Your feedback helps the algorithms promote my videos. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep creating new stories for you. Thank you for watching to the end, and see you in the next video.